When I look back at the 60 years of Esalen, there are many books that criticize Esalen and say it is all appropriation, and they all miss one point: appreciation. One fundamental difference is honoring the roots.
Welcome to Voices of Esalen. I'm Sam Stern. Today my guest is Sravana Borkataky-Varma, a historian and professor of Indian religions, focusing on esoteric rituals and gender in Hinduism. As an educator, she is the Instructional Assistant Professor at the University of Houston, as well as a Fellow of the Center for the Study of World Religions at Harvard Divinity School. She's the co-founder of a nonprofit, Lumen Tree Portal, a Board of Trustee member for Esalen Institute, and serves as an advisory board member for Compassionate Houston. Together we did a little Tantra 101, but before that we briefly got caught up with one another through an old-school Esalen check-in. As you'll hear, this was when the road to the north of Esalen was closed recently. It's now opened up, happily. But at the time, Esalen was closed to guests, yet once again at the mercy of Big Sur's powerful forces of nature. Myself, honestly, I vacillate these days between feeling good and feeling some anxiety and such. I've been through so many closures at Esalen that I've sort of gotten used to it, but I've also developed some sort of trauma around the process. It's a really scary reality to have your livelihood tied to the health of a really old highway that's cut off on one side. And then if anything happens on the other side of it, you kind of got a serious situation. So I don't love that about my reality, that it's so tenuous. I mean, our realities are kind of tenuous in general, but this is such a, it's not anything that's within my control. On the other hand, I like having a break from some of the responsibilities that have gotten to be so regular in my life, because I have so much responsibility anyway as a parent, that it's nice for some of my responsibilities to get taken away and be able to just take a second to think. And I was at Esalen yesterday, and it was quite the quiet, subdued vibe. So I really hope that the road gets repaired so that things can go back to normal. How are you doing?
So first of all, Sam, I don't even know what to say to even express or even trying to put words to that everyday feeling of uncertainty with the roads and the conditions, with the family, with the job, like what you said. I think anything I would want to say to you would be so fake, except for just saying that I just hope, we can get to a better place quickly. Neither do I have solutions, nor am I, I don't do astrology either to predict anything. But really, my heart goes out to you and to everyone who is in Big Sur at this moment, and going day after day, week after week, and having gone through so many of these in some degree or the other. I can only imagine the continuous trauma that it brings, right? I mean, it's like hurricane in Houston. Once those signs, and this has started, where they start saying, get ready for hurricane season, there's something in you that starts to stir, and yet you march on, you live on, and you make the most of it. I'm overwhelmed today. It's end of the semester. So, the students that have kind of been missing in action suddenly expect an A, and then, they want the best grade ever without attending classes or submitting the grades. So it's always very chaotic, the end of the semester. So overwhelmed is what I'm feeling today. Yeah.
I have a rudimentary understanding of what Tantra is, and maybe we could start with defining Tantra for those who might be unfamiliar with its true meaning and scope beyond the popular misconceptions around it.
So before I even define Tantra, there are two terms, Tantra and Neo-Tantra. And we are going to be talking about Tantra. We are not talking about Neo-Tantra. And I will come to Neo-Tantra later. And there are lots of definitions on Tantra, from people saying it's hyper ritual space, like hyper ritual space. I've come to define Tantra, and my definition is a little more expansive in nature, that the human body and the bodily fluids is not rejected. In other words, the human body and the bodily fluids is going to be intentionally activated, intentionally put into the ritual space to move from point A to point B to point B to point C. So human body is extremely important. Which then takes us to the second one, which is, what is the human body? Some people understand it as the koshas. Koshas are translated sometimes as sheath, Sheath. And so the 5 koshas would be Annamaya kosha, which is the physical sheath, the Pranamaya, which is life force, Manomaya, the mental, Vijnanamaya, the wisdom, and Anandamaya, the bliss. So some understand the body to be physical and these 5 other bodies. Some stay with 3, which would become the Karana Sharira, which is the causal body, the Sthula Sharira, the gross body, and the Sukshma Sharira, the subtle body, right? So then some understand it in the context of chakras, nadis, and the Ida, the Pingala, the left breath, the right breath, the Shushumna. The chakras, I would say, comes more as the Eastern philosophies, Eastern understanding of the body meets with the Western body, and then that's where we come with the 7 systems. So the second one is that we are going to have more than just the physical body and the physical and the bodily fluids in the Tantra practice, and we are going to intentionally engage with them. The third aspect would be using of certain tools. Now, some use mandalas, some use yantras, some use prayer beads, some use visualization techniques, but everything is very intentional. And why are we doing this? Why are we engaging the physical body, the bodily fluids, the subtle body? And a tool is for Jivana Mukti, which is where we believe it is liberation in this lifetime.
There are many different pathways for understanding Tantra. For people who are curious, for people who are seeking, how can they get their feet wet?
None of this will make sense if you don't identify yourself as a seeker. So whatever I have to share from here really makes sense if you say, I'm a seeker. And what am I a seeker of? I'm a seeker of trying to learn, trying to know, trying to dip my toes into something that is beyond just my physical body. Now, there are many pathways, right? So you can seek by focusing on your breath, prana. You can really, for some people, when they do square breathing, holotropic breathing, pranayama, specific kind of breath holds, it genuinely shifts them from the present moment and takes them into another dimension. You can seek by dance, like Gabriela Roth's 5 rhythm dance. Now, if you've ever been to a Gabriela Roth 5 rhythm dance session, you know there is a moment in time when something shifts in you, something changes. And when that happens, I remember how I didn't want any clips in my hair. I didn't want any hair ties. I don't know. It was something physical, like I needed like a physical release because the dipping was starting to happen. Even that clip in my hair was starting to irritate me. You can experience this through plant medicine. You can experience this through synthetic psychoactive substances. Right? I mean, there are so many different ways. In these several different pathways is also Tantra. There is also Neo-Tantra. These are different pathways, different strokes for different folks. Sometimes we have to try a few, right? I mean, unless we try a few, we don't know what will work for us. And sometimes we just know this is not for me. That's fine. So Tantra is a pathway. As I said, like in Tantra, we are not going to reject the physical body, the bodily fluids. We are going to use a mandala. And in Tantra, there is a deity. It doesn't matter who the deity is, the names will be different, but there will be a deity. And that deity is going to be your primary focus of engagement. So rituals are focused on the deity, mantras are focused on the deity. The way I will use a yantra or a mandala or a prayer bead will be focused to the deity. We use the concept of drishti, which is sight. So what am I doing? I am trying to get sight of the deity. And when we look at something, that something looks back at us. When we get the drishti with the deity looks back. And that's the direct communion of sorts that we are looking in Tantra. Similarly, there's Neo-Tantra. In Neo-Tantra, we are looking at how through sexual fluids, sexual energy, through the space of two people, two bodies weaving together, two breaths weaving together, two sexual fluids weaving together, we can get into that space of continuum, right? That space of expansiveness. So these are different pathways, and nothing is superior or inferior. There is nothing saying, oh, this is a better way and that is a bad way. It's truly different strokes for different folks.
I'd love to hear about your experience with clairvoyance at a young age.
So I'm from India, born in a state called Assam. Most people know it for its tea, Assam black tea. That's where my family is from. And with regards to where I was born, it's like this really small little town bordering Assam and Arunachal Pradesh. That's another state in the northeastern states of India. My father worked in the government. My mother was a homemaker. Also, I'm a Hindu, so I'm a religious and a religious and a social and a cultural Hindu. Spiritually, I identify myself as a Hindu Tantra practitioner and a Buddhist Tantra practitioner. So I kind of blend my spiritual side. But as a Hindu, when we are born, usually parents build kind of an astrological chart and horoscope. So that's what my parents had done. Their understanding or the predictions made was that I would become a guru and I would have a temple. As I was a young child, it's kind of like how some people would say they have imaginary friends. So I didn't have imaginary friends, but I would get these very clear messages meant for other people.
What does it look like to get a message that's meant for somebody else?
Okay, so I will give an example from literally this morning. If I were to write a screenplay around it and really give characters, it's like I am standing outside of a space and I am privy to a conversation that is happening about someone. And so my job, literally, I say I'm the FedEx here, right? So my job is I'm literally eavesdropping. If I were to put the screenplay, I'm eavesdropping on this conversation, which is absolutely about somebody else. I can identify that's who they're talking about, but I cannot identify who are these two people talking. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. Sometimes when you identify, they are like other people you know in your world, but they have there's no connection, there's no interconnectivity between them. But anyway, so like this morning, and we say there is a twilight hour, which is between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., sometimes 3:30 and 5:30 a.m. I've come to that is my most sacred hour of the day. And any message that comes for me, for someone else in that window of time, I will take it very seriously. And so this time it was a message for a dear colleague and friend. And the message was these other two people talking about this person, my friend, was he needs to read papers more carefully, official papers, before putting signatures. And they're having this conversation. So that's how I know I need to go back to this friend and say, do what you want to do with it. But this is the message I have received. You need to read the fine print before putting a signature.
Has anybody else in your lineage had this gift?
So I've never met her, and she died when my father was still very young, my father's mother. We also, in our tradition, believe it skips generation. So these gifts stay in the family, but they always skip generation. So my father said that he remembers her to have certain such abilities. But again, he was very young when she passed away. So it's not like many people really remember or have, memory of her communicating such messages. So that's not there, but I believe so, yes. But what happens from there, from about 8 and a half till about 15 and a half, 16 years of age, is where we go through different levels of initiation. This is initiation in the Kamakya lineage. Kamakya is a temple in Assam. And so we kind of get trained in a lineage. And the training is purely, at least for me, now I can't say that for everyone, but for me, it was purely ritual based. It was all about rituals. What do you do? What mantras do you chant? How do you engage with what is known as Ishtadevi, which would be the cherished goddess, Devi or goddess or god or whatever, Ishtadeva, Devi, the gender can change. But how do you invoke her in your body? How do you communicate with her? What are some of the features? It was a very, again, much later. It was only when I would do my PhD when I would understand that training was very ritual based training.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. So I got trained in the ritual and life went on. Like it didn't even occur to me that there was anything unique about my childhood, about my growing up, about my ritual space. It was so same old, same old. It was so like, and people often ask me, and I think, I don't know. I mean, either I was so naive, or I have no clue what it is, but I genuinely never questioned it, ever questioned it. And everything will completely change in 2010. 25 years later is when I will do my PhD. And it's during my coursework, I start reading about my own tradition for the first time in my life. I had never studied my religion. I had never studied the rituals. I had never studied the mantras. I had never studied the deities. I had never studied. Then when I started studying, first I went through immense amount of, I don't know, dissonance, emotions where I really believed I lost my religion, I lost my faith. It was almost like, hold on, how come you didn't tell me this? How come you didn't tell me that? And then also a lot of self-judgment, right? It was so much around, how come you didn't question it? I had to go through a whole cycle to put the two together, the scholar and the practitioner together, and then come to where I am today. When we were born, we came with the divine blueprint. It is all within us. There is nothing outside of us that we need to be looking for, grabbing, seeking. So it starts with that fundamental belief system, which, goes to Esalen's human potential movement, right? I mean, end of the day, if we start with that foundation where we say, there is a continuity in the sense that we are as much divine and we have the blueprint of the divine in us. Some use the term Tattvam Asi, I am that. That is one fundamental ground. I think that is an entry point. From there, we can sprout. We can sprout into all kinds of explorations, all kinds of paths. Some paths are more appealing than others. But I think Tantra will not work if we do not believe in that fundamental gnosis of sorts. We need to have that fundamental agreement that, there is nothing outside of us, everything is in us. We need to learn to read and understand that inner us.
Would you agree that Esalen has largely Western roots in terms of its approach to human potential? How can Western practitioners approach Tantra with respect and sensitivity to the cultural and religious roots of the practice?
So I don't see Esalen to have Western roots, strangely. For me, it has very deep Eastern roots because of Sri Aurobindo Ghosh, and Amira Al-Fasa, the mother. And that's the reason why I love Esalen the way I do. Because it has also really helped me understand how to be in the West. It's almost like I see Esalen's deep roots of the East so clearly, even when I walk in the gardens of Esalen, in the farm of the Esalen, when I look at the communities, I see so much East, but it teaches me how to be East and West. If I were to just put it that way, right? Now, coming to how you can engage with Tantra, I think it's just knowledge. It's just wanting to know, wanting to learn. And I've always said that no questions are bad as long as we ask the questions, as long as we don't just fall in the trap of, YouTube telling us what Tantra is or Facebook telling us what Tantra is, as long as we use our questioning mind, and as long as we say, hold on, like, what is the root of Tantra? The root is Tan. Tan is, there are lots and lots of meanings to that root term, Sanskrit term. But in this context, it is weaving, right? What are we weaving? So if you just ask that question, what are we weaving? And in this space, what are we weaving? Now, we might be weaving, we might be coming from a Christian background. We may be coming from Western esoteric communities. We might be coming from a counterculture background. When we are coming to Esalen, we anyway have made an intention to make a shift about something. I am yet to meet someone who comes to Esalen. Maybe the first time you come, you're curious, but you don't return unless you're really trying to turn something in you, trying to transform something in you. And it is not like a weight loss transformation, like, you eat salt one night and the next day your weighing scale has got like 2 pounds, ask me. This is a more fundamental, deep, existential transformation. So when we come to Esalen, and if we are going to engage with Tantra, what are these 2 currents you're going to be weaving? And I can't tell that for you. You have to come with what you're weaving. You will make your own motive. In some ways, we're so scarred by this appropriation question. We're so scarred by, if I say this, I'm appropriating. If I do this, I'm appropriating. Can I do a puja if I'm not, if I'm not coming from the East? And I just get very animated, because my point is, the color of my skin, the pigmentation of my skin does not give me any license to appreciation or appropriation. When I look back at the 60 years of Esalen, there are many books that criticize Esalen and say it is all appropriation, and they all miss one point: appreciation. What is the difference between appropriation and appreciation? One fundamental difference is honoring the roots. Did we not honor the roots in Esalen? Does Mike Murphy never talk about Sri Aurobindo? Absolutely not. But anything, any teaching, anything, when it travels, it has to take on language. It has to take on ways that speaks to the place it has come to. It also has to work within the legal parameters that it has come to. And that, I think, what has happened with this transmission history. It is a very complex transmission history. I mean, if I were to take the example, like instead of speaking in vague terms, let's talk about Kundalini, right? When we talk about Kundalini, we start, if you were to look at texts, Sanskrit texts, a colleague of mine, Anya Foxon, and I, we just finished this manuscript on the transmission history of Kundalini and how it becomes Kundalini yoga, right? When we look at Kundalini in the Sanskrit texts, they're in a footnote. We don't find anything in Kundalini. It is only much later, we come to about 1300s, then we start finding these texts that are now starting to talk of Kundalini in a more, in the sense that we understand now, right? But if you were to look at 700 CE, 800 CE, 1100 CE, we don't find a Kundalini mapping like we understand today. So now somebody can turn and tell me that, oh, Kundalini was appropriated by Westerners from India, from these sacred texts. And that's just completely incorrect, because who were the teachers of Kundalini in the late 1800s? Who were the teachers of Kundalini in the 1960s, in the context of Esalen? Majority were Indian men. And what were they doing? They came to the West. They now started teaching Kundalini, which then will become Kundalini yoga. And as they were teaching, they had to teach to an audience that would understand. Not everybody has the time to spend 15 years or 20 years studying Sanskrit. There is no time. So if I have to explain something to an audience that does not have the language, that does not have the same religious foundation, I have to break it down. So were they appropriating? No. This is appreciation. And today, Kundalini yoga becomes Kundalini yoga. So same happens with Esalen. I think it is ill-informed when people put that label of appropriation on a place like Esalen. It is absolutely ill-informed because you're not seeing how and what was going on for a transmission history and the importance of it in the human potential movement of sorts, or just humans. End of the day, different people are seeking different things. And that's where we are at.
Sravana, I want to bring you back to something that you spoke about earlier in this interview, and that's just the notion of subtle bodies themselves. I know you teach about subtle bodies at Esalen, and Esalen's co-founder, Michael Murphy, has been extraordinarily interested and devoted to this topic. And I'll admit that I don't have a thorough understanding necessarily of what it is. And I'm just wondering if the same way that you spoke about Tantra and sort of unpack that in a really useful way, would you be willing to do the same for subtle bodies?
Sure, but with a huge disclaimer.
Yes.
Which is, I can only define for me. I cannot, this is a definition that I personally think we will never arrive at. And I think it is counterproductive to come to a definition, because we'll never arrive at that, is my thing. Is it biofield? Is it subtle energies? Where do the UFOs fall in all this? I mean, it's just such a complicated definition. So I'm not even going to attempt providing a definition that applies to all. But I'm a practitioner. I have my own definition. It works for me, and I'm going to stick with that. And that's what I teach at Esalen. So what we understand in Shakta Tantra, which is the goddess Tantra lineage, we believe that, how Earth has an axis. Now, if I were to look into the space, I can't see the axis, right? But Earth rotates around an axis. The Earth, there is the solstice where there is a shift in the way Earth kind of makes this, a little bit of a tilt away towards the sun, away from the sun. So there is that tilting that happens, which impacts sun, moon, and all the entire universe as we know it. In Goddess Tantra, we believe we have a same axis. Now, yes, there are people like Swami Dayanand Saraswati who said, I dissected a corpse and there were no chakras, there were no meridian. This is all hogwash. And so we are not going to do it. If I were to dissect my ground in front of my house, I'm not going to find an axis. So the belief, again, it goes back to that. What are we going to fundamentally believe? So we believe that we have an axis that runs through our body. That is the subtle energy, but that is the axis that is plugged into the axis of the earth, that is then plugged into the axis of the other planets. And finally, that is what keeps me plugged to the Brahman or Brahman as the cosmos, right? So subtle body then becomes this energy source that is running. Now, some people have this fear that, oh my God, I had a hysterectomy and so my uterus is gone, so my energy is gone, or my chakra is gone. It's not in any particular organ of the body. It is now some texts define this as spandan, which would be vibration or throb. Some would describe it as the Kula Amrita, which would be the clan nectar. Some would describe it. Listen, different language, words are used to describe this, because at some point, if you have to explain to someone, you have to use words. But words don't do justice. So subtle body, therefore, is this, we call it divine because we believe in divinity. It could be the cosmic energy. It could be and it is what we call as unborn, unceasing cosmic energy. That runs. So now with the practice, it's all about, can I identify it? Can I, like I use this analogy of iPhones, sometimes you have to uninstall a program, you have to install a software update. So what happens is, as we go on with life, it kind of gets cloudy. It kind of gets elements in that energy that kind of, it hinders us from seeing it, from experiencing it, from really engaging with it. And that's the reason we do these practices that we do. That's why we use mantras the way we use mantras, because they create vibrations in the body. If I were to just do Om chanting, I can use that Om chanting to take it to different parts of the body, because it's going to create that vibration. And we believe that is tuning, that is fine tuning and removing these impurities that come into and makes it cloudy. So we are constantly clearing the air. 1. 2, this subtle body, we like to keep it activated, because I joke, this is my joke, where I say, the divine is not going to get into your Outlook calendar, set a meeting, and they say, now I'm going to talk to you. That's not how this works. They just work in the way they work. And so you need to be ready to engage with the divine. And so that's subtle body for me. It's the continuum of the unborn, unceasing axis that runs in my body, like it runs in anything and everything. Plants, animals, birds, name it, and the axis runs.
Can you talk a little bit about death and dying?
So there's a flower, we're in spring season. There are beautiful flowers everywhere. For some people, when they look at a flower, they stop, they look at the flower, they really take the smells in. I found my mom kiss a flower spontaneously, and I'm like, what are you even doing, right? I love seeing flowers, but that does not invoke that kind of an emotion in me. For me, going to a graveyard invokes that emotion in me. Being in a cremation ground invokes that emotion in me. So it goes back to, and in the West, somehow I feel, not talking about death, dying, and beyond, I think we've done huge disservice to the society. There's just so much of taboo. There's so much of fear. There's so much of, like, we don't talk, but it's happening every single day. That beautiful rose that blossomed in your garden in the spring, a week later is going to shed the petals and is going to die. Everything around us is dying at all points of time, but we just stop talking about it. And I feel what that does is it takes away and makes this birth and death one of the most severely separated binary. It's almost like in our tradition, we say death is reverse birth. So why are we not celebrating death? Why is it always that we're celebrating birth, even from gender reveal to this baby shower to that shower to this, that, and the other? Why is birth always celebrated and death absolutely never on the dining table? But everything has that. So when I look at Tantra again, in our path, we have two paths, the right-hand path and the left-hand path, Vamachara and Dakshinachara. And we believe, and both paths come to the same place. So if you are the flower appreciating kind, start there, but come to the decay. And if you are the decay, start there, come to the flower. But you have to go through the whole spectrum to really appreciate, to not live in a binary.
Sravana, you'll be teaching at Esalen a couple times this summer. What will you be teaching about, and who will you be teaching alongside?
So actually this summer I'm teaching two courses. One is on Tantra with Keith Cantu, which is in June. And the other one is with Eric Davids. Embodied writing is, I think, what it is called. But the title slipped my mind. Eric and I go a long way. We did our PhD together. So we did this last year, which was an immense success, where we are putting together embodied writing. So I pull in practices, and these are meditative practices, which include some degree of chanting, sometimes a little bit of breath hold, and kind of activating certain energy flows in our body. So how we do it is Eric gives a prompt for people to write. So say the prompt would be love. So people write at the beginning, whatever they want to write. So we have a writing time. They write something about love. Then I would take them through a set of meditation exercises coming out of Tantra focused on love. Soon after we finish, they get the same prompt, they rewrite, and now they compare what shifted. Mm-hmm. Why did it shift? What shifted? And that's kind of what I'm doing with Eric. The Tantra workshop with Keith Cantu is what I talked about, a liberation in this lifetime. So we're the 4 days that we do is every day is focused on one aspect. So one day would be, what is the subtle body? How do we activate it? How does it even feel? Then they will use a mandala to take one binary. As I said, I can't take people onto moksha in 3 days. I myself can't get there in 3 days, but pick one. People have picked things like, trauma. They've picked, people have said, I'm done feeling sad. So take something and we make them pick something up on Tuesday. And by Friday, they've gone through that motion through this tantric rubrics of sort and see if it worked for them or didn't work for them.
Sravana, thank you so much for having this conversation today. Thank you for the education. Sorry that I came about it from such a beginner's point of view, but I really appreciate the way that you've been able to walk me through it. Can't wait to see you at Esalen this summer.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I hope everything goes well.
Thank you.
And stay safe, Sam.
Thank you for listening to Voices of Esalen. Today's show is produced in conjunction with Shira Levine. Our theme music is composed by Nico Holloman. All additional music is by Blue Dot Sessions. Stay tuned for further episodes. And if you really like what's going on, please rate and review this podcast. Yes, it's your way to help.